Hi, this is your instructor Yüksel Günal. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to build a slightly more sophisticated Android application. More sophisticated in the sense that it's going to add some buttons, some UI elements other than just text, and I'm going to show you how you can introduce interactivity to these UI buttons. Interactivity in the sense that a user could click on one of these buttons or any of these buttons and then see some sort of response. And here's the application I'm going to build for you. It's a quiz application, a test application. It asks a question, and then there are two buttons. The user is expected to press yes or no. And if the user gets the answer correct, it will say correct. If the user gets the answer incorrect, it's going to say incorrect. It's a very simple application, but it's essential to get going with what we plan to do the rest of the semester. And here's the application that I built for the lecture notes ahead of time. We'll repeat the exercise together on another computer that I have. This is the virtual device I'm using. It's Nexus 4, and I have a bunch of devices. This could run on a tablet, whatnot, but I chose to run it in Nexus 4. Now, all it does, it comes up. Actually, let's go back. If you're an Android user, you'll know that if you click this, you'll get the applications installed on your device. And this is our application, a simple question. Click on it, double click on it. It asks the question, Istanbul is the capital of Turkey, yes or no? Let's click yes. It says incorrect. And you say no, it says correct. That's all the application does. But by using this application, we'll introduce quite a few concepts, like how you add interactivity to UI elements, how you put UI objects on the screen, how come this yes button is not here but here, or how come those two are together but not separate, how come the text appears here and then next right underneath the buttons are. These may look straightforward unless you deep dive into programming. Um, there are a few concepts to introduce to make sure you understand how to make sure that the screen appears as it does. Now, let's move to my remote computer where I have the basic setup, where I built the first application for you. Now, again, I have a simulator running here, and I have two applications installed. One is called just my application, the other is called Hello Boğaziçi. Hello Boğaziçi is what we built together during the first lecture. It simply displays a string. There is no interactivity. You cannot click on it or type or anything. Now, this is the application. And as I told you, the UI elements are defined in those XML files. You click on it, you see the design. Let's enlarge this view a little bit. Let's close this bottom view. And let's enlarge the screen a little bit so you can see things a bit more clearly. So this is the design, and all it does is that it has a string. Let's see where that string is. So there is this text view element in XML, and in the lecture notes I have a brief explanation what XML is. Text view is the XML element that defines this string. So what I'm going to do is, let me go back to lecture notes. I'm going to build the application, but let's look at this application, how we build it, and the concepts that I'm going to introduce. So this is the sketch of my application. It's always a good idea to sketch the user interface manually or using a tool. I'm using OpenOffice if you're interested in. You want to know what I use. I use OpenOffice drawing. So I draw it using OpenOffice, or you can do it by hand. So you see these dash lines. Here I define the boundary of the screen, and this is what I call a vertical layout. Now, the concept of a layout is the structure or the class that allows you to order objects on this, or to order UI elements on the screen. Now, the very basic layout is a linear layout. What linear layout does is to put UI objects on the screen in linear order. And what kind of UI objects do I have here? I have this text. I have three UI objects. This text, I have the yes button and the no button. So I have three UI elements. Now, at the root of the UI hierarchy, I have this vertical linear layout. I didn't put linear here, but this is linear layout. And what that means is that vertical layout is that it has two elements, the text and those two buttons together placed vertically, one after the other. So what Android does when I define a linear layout and add elements to it is that the first element it gets, it will put it at the top. The next element it gets, it puts it next. And if I add another element, it will put it next to it. Now, so that's the linear vertical layout. Now, how about the buttons? Now, the buttons, as you see, are next to one another, and that they are in another box. Now, this other box, represents um, a, a horizontal layout, horizontal linear layout inside a vertical layout. So this large one is the root layout. It's vertical, and I'll show you how you define that. Inside it, there is this element, and then there is this other layout, horizontal layout, which contains yes and no buttons. Now, here, let me make a comment here. If you wanted to see those two buttons in vertical order, then you should have defined this layout as vertical as well. Maybe you can play with it on your own, but in my example, I defined this horizontal layout so that the buttons could be placed next to one another. So that's what we're going to build. What we're going to do, we're going to define a linear vertical layout. We'll put a text string in it, inside which we'll add another layout, linear layout, but this time horizontal layout. And in the horizontal layout, we'll add two buttons, yes and no. Let's see how we can do that using Android Studio. And I'm hoping you'll have fun doing this. We go to design. I open the content hello.xml file. I open the design. Now, what I do, see, the UI design is really straightforward. It's drag and drop. Now, so I chose this element. Let me delete it. I'll just use the delete key. Of course, you don't see me pressing it, but I go to the keyboard and use the delete key. So it goes away. Now, let me go to the text view. If you look at this, by default, Android Studio gave me a relative layout. Let's change this to linear layout. I'll do this manually just to show you that this can be done also manually. Now let's see what happened. Let's go back to design. So now I have a linear layout. It asks me, if you see, it asks me the orientation. What did we say at the beginning of the lecture? We said we'll have outside the vertical layout. Let me make this a bit smaller so that you can see the blue boundary clearly. You see this blue boundary? So that's the boundary of the layout. Now, next, let me just remind you what we're trying to build again. So I have this outside boundary now. It's a linear layout, and it's defined to be vertical. It's orientation defined to be vertical. Now I'm going to add a text field, and I'll type Istanbul is the capital of Turkey into it. Now a text field is actually just a plain text view. So I choose it. You see this palette. These are where this is where all these UI elements are. I click on it, I drag it, and I drop it. Again, this is just drag and drop. I move it around a little bit here. Let me enlarge it. Okay. And I type in the text. Istanbul is the capital of Turkey, if not the world. Now, ID text view. I'm not going to change it. I'll just leave it as default. So we have a text now. Let's save. Let's just see what happens if we just run this. Well, actually, all I did was change the layout and change the string. Now it's going to come back. And while we're waiting for that, I want to show you what happens when I did the design. See this content hello. Let's go to text. See what Android Studio did. It actually added a text view with the text Istanbul is the capital of Turkey. Okay. it defined the width as 352 dp. Let me change this to wrap content as well. I'm not sure if, actually, that's not a good idea. I shouldn't be doing that because then it's going to fill the entire, well, let's just see what happens. Why not? Okay, we're playing with this, so we'll just see what happens. Did it change? See, the text has changed. Okay, now that's the first part of the design. And we have these monitors at the bottom of Android Studio. Let's close the monitor view. You click on this icon and close it so that we get a bigger screen. Next, I just want to remind you what we're up to. So this is the screen we're trying to build. Now, we have this, the text, we have the external linear vertical layout. Now we're building the horizontal inner layout, horizontal linear inner layout. Let's do that. So we have horizontal layout. Let's just bring it here. See, we have the layout here. So this oops, okay, this moves it a bit. All right, so we have the layout. Now, next we're going to add two buttons. Okay, so the button widget is this button. Let's bring it here. Okay, that's one button. So this is, we're still within the layout. As you can see, I can move the button around. Okay. Now let's get another button because we're going to have a yes and a no button. This again, put it into here. Let's move it a little bit to the right. So, okay. Now double click on it. Okay, double click, and then text appears. We'll say yes here. ID. Let's say the ID is yes button. ID is like a variable name in programming. Okay, so put something meaningful there. So let's call this no, and let's call this button rather than take the default button through. Let's call this no button so that it's going to be meaningful when you look at the program. Okay, so they appear vertical. Okay, so let's save it by pressing Control Save. Let's take a look at what happened to the XML file, content underscore hello.xml, because as we're adding these visual elements, actually the content is changing. See what happened. That was only text layout. Now when I added the linear horizontal layout, it added this entire element first without the buttons. And as I added more elements like buttons, as you can see, it added the button definitions. And you can see that yes button is the name of the or the ID of the button on the left, and no button is the ID of the button on the right. And we actually did this together, right? You double click on it. Let me just change it ESB just so that you see what's happening here. See the ID changed to ESB. Okay, so as you change the UI design, things happen on that file. So you should be careful when you update that file because Android Studio, as you add elements to the UI, is going to change the file. So design and text. Okay. So let's see also see what happened to, if anything, to Hello Activity program. There isn't much. Nothing really happened. It's the original, but we're going to be adding stuff to this, as I'm going to show you. Now let's go back to our design. So we have the design. Okay. Now let's run and see what happens. Okay. Let's just run it using the same simulator. So emulator. It's going to take a while. Let's just wait for it. Okay, so we have the program running and monitors show up automatically. Okay, so this is our virtual device. I could have also run this on a real Android device externally, but I haven't attached any Android device to this remote computer, so I'm not doing that. But it's pretty straightforward, and I described in the lecture notes how to do that. So that's what we have. Now, see, nothing is happening, right? There's no interaction. I click on yes, no, nothing happens. So the question next is, now that we have put elements on UI as we wish, where they should be, how do you add interactivity? When you click on a button, how do you make sure that your program does something? So I would like to remind you of the lecture on interfaces in this context. Now, the way interfaces work is that you define some behavior in an interface class, and a class implements the terminologies, implements that interface. What that means is that when a UI element is clicked, the button class, an object of the button class, will receive an event from Android, from the Android operating system. And it all happens in the background. You don't really have a control of it. It's taken care of by Android. But what you have control over is what the UI element does with the event, that is the click event. Now, what we're going to do next is that we're going to change the behavior of the button when it's clicked. It's going to do something. A button click could do lots of things. It could pop up another activity. It could tell you something. It could go to a remote server, log you in. It could do lots of things. So the question is, when we do, and our task here is that when one of these buttons is clicked, we're going to display to the user whether the answer is correct or not. So let's go about that. Now, until now, we haven't written a single line of Java code. Now we're going to do that. Now, first of all, in order to be able to do anything with the button, I need to define variables. Let me define private button. And now, as I'm typing, look what happens. Android Studio is giving me hints. So I typed in button. It says, is this the android.widget.button class? I take it, okay? Let's call this yes button. Okay, that's one element. Now, and what happens is that if you click on this import, it added this import class, okay? Now let's say private button, no button, okay? So we define the variables, but how do we get a handle on the button object? So I say yes button, equals, and this is something I showed on my lecture notes. There's a standard way of doing this. Let me actually not like this. Standard way of doing this is you do find view by ID. Now, this is a method provided by the activity class, and the input it needs is the R class that Android actually maintains. You don't do anything with the R class. You do ID, and see, as I'm typing, Android Studio shows me what resources are available. And let me go. See, there is action settings. There is no button. Text view, toolbar, yes button. So what I need here, yes button. Now, notice how this line of code is underlined, and there is error. See what it says. This is required, but not found. So find view by returns an incompatible type. Let's see what it returns. It returns the view. View is the base class of UI elements. Now, this is generic class. Now, it could be a button, it could be a text field, it could be a radio button, it could be any UI element you can imagine. So this is the base class. Remember the inheritance relationship in Java. You define a base class, let's say animal, to give an example, and then you have a chimpanzee or a fish, etc., being the subclasses representing a specific animal. So here, view is a base class, a UI element. A button is a specific one. The text also is a specific one. So what I need to tell is that I'm getting a view, but I know that this is going to be a button. So I cast it to the button class. This is called class casting, or casting to a class. Okay, so three things. I need to use find view by ID method of the base activity class. I need to tell it what I'm looking for, and the ID is what I defined when I was doing the design. It's the yes button ID. And finally, I should say I'm expecting this to be a button and nothing else. This is a view. It finds a view, but let's go back to the view again. See, this method, this is the Java class, and basic Android Java class. It's taking an ID and it's returning a view, but it could be any view. What I'm saying here is that this view I know as a fact is a yes, is a button. Now I'll do the same thing with no button again. See, as I'm typing, it tells me what it expects or what could happen there. r.id, and this time no button. Now I have the button objects. Notice I'm doing this on create. On create is called when the application is created first, and that's what I need to do. I need to set up all the variables that I need throughout the lifetime of the application. And again, I did not create this on create method myself. When I created the application from a template, Android Studio created this by default. So it's very nice. You don't have to write these on your own. You just start with something that's already generated for you by Android Studio. Now, next thing is to add some action. Now, this is going to be a bit tricky. What we're going to do is that, and I showed this in the lecture notes, and I explained it. Let me just copy and paste from my other computer so that it will be faster rather than typing it one by one. Sorry, this is yes button. This is hello activity. I'll explain what these are. And we have a compilation error here, but I'll come to that. Now, what I've done here is as follows. Now, given the interface model, the button has listeners. It listens to click events. Now, but when it detects a click event, what it should be doing? In order to be able to define that behavior, here's what you need to do. You call the set on click listener method of the button object, and you instantiate a new view on click listener object, and then override or define the on click method. And what I'm doing here is that, and I'm going to show what this is later. I described it in lecture notes. This simply prints a text. It takes the activity object. It takes a string to print. It takes some other parameters, and then that shows the text. So this is what I implemented. Similarly, and I have a compilation error, and we'll fix it soon. I'll have a behavior for the no button. And please refer to your lecture notes for detailed explanation of how this works. Let's just hello activity. So I have two compilation errors. You see the red buttons, okay? Now what's happening here is that I'm assuming that there are two string objects, incorrect host and correct host, but they are not defined. So look at the values subdirectory and strings class. See, I need to define them right here, and I'll just copy and paste from my earlier implementation. The way you do this, or let's actually do this. This is an XML element. You say string name equals it's incorrect toast. Now Android Studio automatically closes a string tag for you. Now here goes the actual text. So that is what's going to be displayed. So I say incorrect. Okay. So I defined a new variable. Let's go back to the activity class and see the compilation error disappeared. Okay. Because now Android Studio knows that from the strings.xml, it knows that this variable is defined. Now the next compilation error, correct toast. Let's go to the strings.xml. Similarly, let's define string name. Now I'm going to introduce a compilation error. Let's see what happens. Okay. So notice that I wrote correctos without an underscore. So the compilation error has not disappeared. Let's go back. Let me put underscore, save, go back. So the compilation error has been fixed. So what happens with the R class? This is R class essentially gives you makes the connection, let me say, from the XML file definitions to Java. So you define something in an XML file like strings or content or activity, etc. And then the objects you define there, or resources, I should rather say resources, because everything is referred to as resources. For instance, button resource, okay? It's defined here. It has an ID. See, it says no button. So, but button is also a Java class. The question is, how do I get a handle on this Java class that will correspond to this resource? So the answer is right here. You use r.id.button to get the objects. If you're looking for strings, then you'd use r.string. So we'll spend more time on these, but just for now, I'm just giving you the basic idea. Now let's run this application. Okay, all you need to do is just click. And again, I'm running a virtual device. I'm using the one that's already running, clicking on it. So it's building. So it says it's building indexing. Build is finished. It's copying under the covers, copying. So it's coming up. It's reloading the application in the virtual Android device. So now let's see. Let's see what happens if I click yes. So it says incorrect. This is correct. Okay. So we built the second application, second Android application, and we'll build a lot more throughout the rest of the semester. But again, go back to your Java notes if you need some refresher, especially the concept of interface, notification mechanism, etc. We'll be doing more of these applications, and we'll build more sophisticated applications the rest of the time. Enjoy the class, enjoy the lecture.